So the Baha'i faith is not another church to be established on the street corner so I could become a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu or a Baha'i. That's not what this is. That the revelation of Baha'u'llah is the fulfillment of the revelation of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So Judaism has a recognized role for the Davidic kingship in its functioning. When the Davidic throne was well known and established, and during a peaceful, basically peaceful time, from about 70 AD to 600 AD, this is when the Talmud was put together and the community flourished. The covenant is not shunning the Holy Family. So for Jews, they should be able to accept whoever the heir to David's throne is in the day-to-day and cooperate and function with that person as a member with a vote of one in their community. Christianity prophesizes this. Islam has this as the caliphate. So that they don't need to throw away their other religious systems and convert to something else. This would be disruptive and damaging and overthrow the order of society, because religion's not a matter of compulsion. What the Baha'i revelation does is it provides for a spiritual way for the people to elect the supreme tribunal to maintain international unity and diversity in culture and language and perception. In fact, in the revelation of Baha'u'llah for the Bahais, who acknowledge Baha'u'llah as being their religion, it states that the Bab writes, for as many different souls, there's different paths to God. And we have a pure spiritual democracy. The way Abdulbaha says different viewpoints of the intellect advance science, we have to have free and open society and discourse when it comes to spiritual and religious matters. If two people start fighting about a question of spirituality or religion, then they're both wrong, because conflict and strife are forbidden in the book. So we're going to learn decorum, to have an international decorum for discussing these religious and spiritual matters. And we're not going to continue to imitate the blind aggression and literalist interpretation that are used to justify war, racism, and discrimination that the generations of the past have done. For instance, if this one person's father was Mirza Yahya, and he decided he wasn't going to have anything to do with it, and he went and found Abdulbaha and got straightened out and lived the rest of his life as a Baha'i. So the Baha'is are unique because they have a different perspective. The Baha'i revelation is the revelation of the government that God promised to the people through the Prophet Muhammad and Moses and Christ and the rest. It's a government in which we can maintain our own individual freedoms of religion and worship, even down to the individual level. Certain religious geniuses are always going to raise up in a culture, like Mullah Sadra or Suwardi or Ibn al-Arabi or Rumi. Well, they are not creating heresies from the standpoint that they're heretics, that they are creating something new. They're just making an advancement in the validity of the real religion that Muhammad had revealed that came to their minds in the form of Islam. Islam got people who didn't accept the Bible to believe in Jesus and Moses. This is very great. And it focused on the simple teachings of the first step in the journey back to God is not my will, O Lord, but thine. And sometimes things contrary to our wishes will happen, and we will acquiesce radiantly for the best interests of the group and the majority, which is the will of God. You know, but for people who have selfish motives and things, this is a challenge and a struggle for them. And the people who govern the nation states and the cities of the world have a lot more leeway in what they're able to do. A person who is involved on the spiritual side of helping humanity by being a religious teacher and educator, they have a more narrow leeway. They're more restricted because they're not allowed to infringe upon the rights of another's soul. So even when we're talking to another one person, they're sovereign in their own decision whether they're going to or how they're going to recognize God and implement the divine teachings in their own personal life. Another person in the community has no right to tell another person how they will behave in their life and have good thoughts, good words, and good deeds as they understand that in their own personal relationship with God. Now, if in their own personal relationship with God, the thought, word, and deed that occurred to them was to rob a bank, the clergy has nothing to do with this. The local police will go take care of that. See what I'm saying? The religious ones are just educating and guiding people, and they should be leading by example. That's the main thing. And nobody can adhere to this example perfectly. We're all going to fall short of the glory of God. Abdulbaha lived the perfect life, and he's the perfect example. And when we read all of the negative things said about him in the newspapers and by other people that disagreed with the Baha'i faith and by other members of his family that wrote against him and his wife, like his brother Bahaullah and other things like this, we see that all of the complaints against Abdul-Baha's person are all motivated by the fact that he's promoting his father's covenant, that is Baha'u'llah's covenant. But nevertheless, they point to, things that he did or said or the way he said them or this word, they nitpick and stuff like this. From our point of view, he's still the perfect example of a perfect person. The fact that he says he's failed when it comes to please other people, and they had this critique of him, shows what a real perfect person looks like. A perfect person is a person who's able to please God and make that journey back to God inside themselves, and at the same time has all of the imperfections and defects of what it means to be a human being. But by surrendering their will to the will of God, which is the will of the covenant, they now leave the world of imperfection and enter the world of perfection. And the world of perfection is having a direct and immediate experience of God in their own soul, in their own spirit, the way they understand it. Therefore, clergy or religious teachers are supposed to be saying these type of things that I've been saying, that people are sovereign and so forth. Now, when it comes to rational proofs and science and logic in recognizing the reality and the function and how God communicates with human beings through the appearance of the manifestations, we have other things we can talk about, such as prophecies and other proofs and evidences and things like this. But in order for a person to accept those proofs, they have to be intelligent, meaning they have to use their intelligence, meaning they have to use their intellect that God gave them and their independent investigation of the truth that Baha'u'llah gave them in the principle. So you can see what the future of the Baha'i faith is. The Baha'i faith, as far as those who say they're Baha'i, self-identify as Baha'i, who are actually Baha'i by accepting the appointed successor of the covenant in their day and are now equal members of the holy household with all their other fellow believers, we have a role to continue to promote the cause of God, which is this education. And as far as what the Baha'i faith's gift is for all the other people and religions of the world, it's the lesser piece. It's a way for them to elect the Supreme Tribunal without converting to the Baha'i faith. That's what Baha'u'llah gave the people. So the Baha'is have no intention to take rulership of the planet away from anybody. But in order for all of us to function together, it's obvious. It is obvious we need to elect the Supreme Tribunal. Now, the prophecies state, because the violation of the covenants was known, 1928 covenant, 1921, that the dead in Christ would rise first. And the dead in Christ are the Christian people that live in these countries that are named in the Christian Bible as being symbolized by a bear, Russia, an eagle, the United States, a lion, England, and a leopard or a man's face, France. And it even says Russia, which is a bear, will be transformed into a ox, which is agricultural, whereas a bear is a predatory animal, an ox is not predatory. And this is the prophecy. So by focusing Baha'u'llah's message to elect the Supreme Tribunal, where they don't have to convert to another religion, to the United States, England, France, and Russia. These are prophesied to be the first four countries in the book of Revelation that will form the charter members of the Supreme Tribunal, the way they were the first four countries, along with China, that were the charter members of the United Nations. This war that's happening is a civil war between Eastern and Western Rome, where the popes claim successorship to the throne of Caesar in the papacy with the robes they wear, the fish hat of Dagon, the robes, the crossier, the robes of Janus, the keys of Janus and Sibyl, and these other things that go back historically. And then the Byzantine white throne wound up in Moscow. So then they have Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and then the West was the Pope, and then other people in the West didn't want to be under the Pope's oppression, and they protested against it. They became the Protestants. And this is where the problems are happening. And nations like North Korea and Iran are fearful of the nuclear power of these Christian countries that are acting in a way that doesn't reflect the spirit of Christ as revealed by Muhammad and the 12 imams and the sacrifice of the Prince of Martyrs, the Imam Hussein. So this is the transitional period that the people of the world are in today. And the zeal for his father's house, the Supreme Tribunal election that will consume him, is what is consuming our time and energy. All of the Bahais of the world should be promoting the election of the Supreme Tribunal. Instead, the Sans Guardians are promoting sign a card, join, make a covenant with us, and come under the slave dictatorship of that headless council set up in Haifa, Israel, that separated themselves from the family in the book in 1960. And this only is spreading, knowingly or unknowingly, naf samara. In other words, it doesn't matter if a person's spiritual, good, or holy. If they get the COVID-19, they're contagious and they're infected, and they'll give it to other people. It's the same thing with this covenant-breaking, insistent self problem. If a person has encountered this, it's infectious and it spreads faster. Violation of the covenant spreads faster than health. Health spreads slower. Cleanliness is less powerful in the material realm than dirt or unsanitariness. If we take a rag and touch it to some dirt, the rag gets dirty. And disease spreads rapidly. The power of health doesn't spread as rapidly between people. So again, it's part of our job as individuals to stay healthy. If we get a virus, we should self-quarantine. When we're over it, we can go associate with people again. If we're struggling with a spiritual, personal problem in the growth of our own incompleteness, we don't want to infect people with that. We'd want to heal spiritually and grow and so forth in this way. And our job when we're healthy is to promote. The teaching effort means promoting health, which means happiness, spirituality, detachment from material concerns, and things like this. Unless we're detached from material concerns, we're not fit to manage material concerns. And this is why the spiritual people of the world who are religious in the Abrahamic faiths, as well as the Bahais who are firm in the covenant, the most we do is apply these teachings to ourselves. And the Bahais should be living the example as feeling as spiritual citizens of the world now. And they should all be in favor of the election of the Supreme Tribunal correctly and properly. And the Bahais are not able to promote that unless they are connected as members of the holy household to the true universal house of justice that has the living descendant of King David as the president. The Jews will recognize the descendant of David, so will the Christians, and so will the Muslims. And it doesn't matter what the religion is. Now, when the Supreme Tribunal is set up and established, we will have these different religions, and we'll see the end of war. And through international cooperation at the international level, they will fix the environment, get us off of fossil fuels to high-tech other alternate energy sources. and these other problems in society that are based on education and agriculture and things like this will be remedied and ameliorated. Then in 1,000 years, another manifestation of God is going to appear. This manifestation of God is going to reveal a new religion direct from God. So now there's going to be another revelation in the world that the government will protect the rights of that manifestation to have freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And other people will join that religion and become students of it. And the dispensation of Baha'i faith will be over, and we'll have another religion. If his name's Sam, maybe they'll be called Samis, and that will be this religion. And then in another 1,000 or 2,000 years, another manifestation of God will come and reveal another religion that's different than the previous religion. But the government of the Supreme Tribunal will be maintained for a 5,000 century cycle as God keeps sending more and more and more and more religious teaching and development. Not only that, individual people will be bringing forth new ideas. Thousands of Galileos, Madame Curies, Isaac Newtons, Hypatia the High Priestesses, and other great developments of arts and sciences, Joans of Arc, will arise in our society, and the government will protect their right to freedom of speech and freedom of worship, and they will develop new arts and sciences as the greater and lesser lights. This is what we mean when we say the whole world will be Baha'i. We mean not that they'll sign cards and make a contract and come under a covenant of that sans guardian UHJ, but that they will become real human beings, be able to connect directly with God through their rays of the Holy Spirit, or whatever language they use to understand that, and be actualized and transcendent shining lights, and feel great about this. As their bodies age and get ready to go back into the grave, by spiritually growing and living their whole life, they will then just simply transcend into the Abha kingdom on high. And this is what planet Earth's about. It's where babies are born, souls are schooled, real human beings are made, and then angels that fly from the human caterpillar into the spiritual realm. And this is a process. And spiritual teachers and educators only give guidance and education. It's up for individuals and nation states and world leaders to figure out how to implement these things for themselves. We have nothing to say about how a person's going to implement these teachings for themselves, or how the nations are going to implement these things. When we say that they should elect the Supreme Tribunal, these 4 countries, as charter members, especially to solve their Christian dispute or get it out of the way, remove the religious prejudices that have divided Christianity so that they can elect this election that's going to happen, how's it going to happen? Like, where are the ballots going to start? Who's going to count the ballots? How will the approval process be conducted? Where will it be convened? Who will be there? You know, and how will the representatives get vetted? And when the representatives meet, where will they meet? And when they have their first meeting, what's their first order of business? And so forth and so on. That's up for them, how to implement that. The way the generation before tried their best with the World Court and failed, tried their best with the League of Nations, but Henry Cabot Lodge and them didn't want the US to join and it failed. How when the US did join the UN, it's still not working the way it should be. Now the leaders of the world and the people of the world have a chance to do this thing correctly. And we can see the abomination that the Bahais did when they forced that election of the headless UHJ and separated themselves from the true Ark of the Covenant and deprived themselves of membership and access to the holy household that we're all supposed to be part of. So that's the future of the Baha'i faith. That's the current situation we're in now, the 7 months of the Valley of Decision. And God will continue to fashion and guide the people through current events. But the Baha'is are to turn inwardly and do their inner temple work and their crusade against the insistent self. And when they get to a point where they feel like they're consecrated and the things of this world no longer cause them to waver or affect them, including the horrible, horrific catastrophes of this world that they can overcome, then they're ready to go out and wait for God to introduce them to other human beings that might be ready to do the same work in the name of Baha'i for overcoming the insistent self. Meanwhile, for people who are already doing that in their other religious and spiritual traditions, they're ready to elect the Supreme Tribunal right now. And that's the definition we mean when we say the whole world would be Baha'i. We see the world is Baha'i now because the majority of people love humanity and want to be the servants of humanity. And they all agree that war should be illegal. And they entered into this covenant in 1928, saying they wished they were Baha'is when they said that in 1928. And after 9/11 and during the Ukraine thing now we're at the point where they can actually practice their belief of enforcing the International Covenant of Peace on themselves and spreading this teaching to their neighbors and getting the majority of people in their nations to uphold this International Covenant of Peace. And nowhere in the International Covenant of Peace does it say a person has to be a Baha'i or a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim. If you're a human being, you're in. And human beings deserve to live in a mature spiritual planet run by competent administrators whose hearts belong to God, that's war-free. There's still going to be conflicts. There's still going to be problems. Otherwise, life would be boring and non-exciting. We're only talking about the elimination of these wars. And the other problem is, in order to solve the environmental problems and other problems we have with manufacturing, trade, and shipping, is we need a new energy source. We can't use fossil fuels. And they have this energy source. It's not just solar panels and hydro electronics, but they have other ways of making energy and cars and machines that are green. If they were to release these things now, the war machine would use them to invade Ukraine. And instead of having trouble fueling tanks over 100-mile logistical problem supply line and bullets and bombs and guns, when they bring the troops in to occupy the area, they would have these supercharged type of electrical power vehicles that could run for days without being recharged. And they would have energy weapons like they used in the Gulf, in the Panama deception, when they took back the Panama Canal, and the US used these exotic vibration weapons that melted the people of Panama into goo, green globs of goo that they buried in a mass grave. This is documented in the documentary, The Panama Deception. If we were watching a full-scale, high-tech, futuristic space-type war in the Ukraine, this would be horrific. So they can't release these other energy technologies that would allow us to go green if some people still have a war mentality, empire building mentality to use these technologies to destroy human life. So at the same time, we need to go green and switch to different technology, and the war is preventing us. The war mentality is preventing us from releasing these high-tech abilities to go green, because those things could be militarized and would be even more destructive weapons than what we're seeing now. So it's the problem is recompounded, doubled and doubled and doubled and tripled again. And it still comes down to the war mentality and the empire building mentality, which is rooted in the insistent self of the person. And when these people get an inferiority superiority complex, they have to overcompensate by building the tallest building, conquering the great land. Ooh, look at me, I'm big and strong. This leads more into the destruction and the calamity. So we want to roll this back. And this only can happen one individual at a time. And each individual can choose if they are attracted to the spirit, to be converted to the spiritual upholding of the 1928 Covenant of Peace, and not be in violation of it. And once they do this, they might be able to get other people to understand what this is and become consecrated. And when the majority of people have this spiritual conversion to being spiritual and are consecrated in it and are attracted to the creator of the universe, they can become spiritually mature. And when they're in that state, then we say they're Baha'is. And it doesn't matter what tradition they self-acknowledge, whatever, or what philosophy or practice they use to get there. And then, of course, they're ready to uphold, if they were aware of it, the 1928 Covenant of Peace. Most people aren't even aware that we're all under this covenant, that every citizen of every country is part of this agreement. And in the eyes of God, we're all in violation of this covenant right now. If we're not promoting the International Covenant of Peace in 1928, we're in violation of it. And the countries that are invading other lands like Afghanistan, Iraq, now Ukraine, are also in violation of it. Or the corporations invading, starting a civil war, and then the corporations invading Sudan. The executives of those corporations are in violation of the International Covenant of Peace in 1928. This is what the indictment issued in 1980 says. And it was delivered again under executive authority of the House of Justice to Madeleine Albright in 2003. And then the Universal House of Justice itself ratified it on Rizwan of 2020, the 40-year anniversary of when it was issued in 1980, fulfilling the 40-year prophecy. And wham, the pandemic happened, the lockdown, and the economic collapse. And then we announced in our Nowruz speech of 2020, the war would happen. And lo and behold, here it is. This is because we're all of us, all of the people of the world, are not in harmony and support of the 1928 International Covenant of Peace. We're all in violation of this covenant globally. The same problems you're explaining that are the grievous error that is just blasting the people who self-identify throughout the world as Baha'i is a direct result of their violation of the 1921 Baha'i Covenant, and all of the ills and problems you see in the Baha'i world are a result of this. And this is a mirror for what's happening in the greater world of humanity that's in violation of its covenant made 7 years later in 1928. And lo and behold, look at all the ills that all of the people of the world are suffering. The Jews, the Christians, the Muslims. They're having riots on the Al-Aqsa Mosque again. Every time Ramadan comes around the same time as Israel Day, there's problems over there. They can't even manage switching the venue at the Temple Mount for different religious activities without a war. How immature is all this? These religious prejudices need to go. You know, if it came down to a choice, and you could either be right with God or be a Jew, or right with God or be a Christian, or be right with God in your soul and be a Muslim, or be right with God in your soul and be a Baha'i, what would you pick? I would pick being right with God. I'm not going to drown in the sea of names and labels. As far as I'm concerned, Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, the Bab, Bahaullah are all one person, that they're the manifestation of God. I'm not interested in the names Moshe and Isa and Ahmad and Bab and Baha'u'llah. This is not what's important. What's important is the inner spiritual reality of this. In fact, Baha'u'llah is a title, which means the light of God, because it's the same light of God that was shining through Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri, that shined through Isa and Musa and Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Buddha and Krishna and Zoroaster. It's the same light. This is coming from the sun. It's a symbol. It's a symbol of the revelation. When the manifestation of God gives a revelation direct from God, we have a soul, each one of us. We have a soul that's an emanation direct from God. It's like a breath from God. And by direct from God, we mean God created the system through which the soul comes into existence. There's no immediate connection to it. It's an emanation. The revelation direct from God. There's no spark of fire left God and ignited a fire on the earth, but we call it a revelation direct from God. And this revelation direct from God unveils our soul for the individual that's an emanation direct from God. The revelation direct from God reveals our soul, which is an emanation direct from God. And the soul becomes activated. And when this happens, the person becomes happy. and free. And this is what the cause of God is, making real human beings. And in order for this to happen, we need controversial human figures to appear amongst the different people in human society and give these world reforming views the way they understand it in the cultures and generation of people that they appear amongst. Every time this happens, the mob rises up to kill them, like Jerusalem rose up to crucify Jesus. Then God had Rome destroy Jerusalem. This is a repetitive thing. When Muhammad rose up, they were going to kill him, and he had escaped by horse on the night journey. Moses was run out of town. Krishna was shot with an arrow. Buddha was given a happy birthday meal on his 80th birthday, and it was poisoned food, and he died. This is what the people do to the manifestations. The only thing that's going to protect the manifestation of God in their mission is a just government that's going to uphold their human right. If the manifestation of God hasn't broken a law, if the manifestation of God hasn't robbed a bank, if the manifestation of God hasn't committed a murder, then they're free to have freedom of speech to teach their faith. When the Bab showed up in Shiraz, he never committed any crimes. He was the most gentle, kind, benevolent human being we could possibly imagine, beset with weakness and kindness and meekness. He stood up for right business transaction because he was a merchant, and to have spirituality in our international commerce, and the spiritual teaching of how we should have spiritual trade and merchandise in the world economy comes from the example of the Bab himself. Well, because he explained, he fulfilled the prophecy of the Quran, where it says the Lord will come with the holy angels. And in the Hadith, it says a woman shall give birth to one who will be her Lord. This is obviously the prophecy of the coming of the Qayyim, which he claimed to be. That's why they went against him. He said he was the Qayyim. So if he's either the Qayyim or he's not. If a lot of people think he's the Qayyim, well, then what does that mean for the government? When the clergy in Shiraz got upset and the people got upset and wanted to persecute the Bab, it was the job of the government in Tehran, of the Qajars, to protect the Bab's freedoms and as a human being to have a wife and a family and this. And it was just a religious dispute. It didn't need to turn into killing and murder. If that government would have been stronger, none of the people would have been massacred in the way that it had. And had it investigated the attempt on the Shah's life and found out it was this lone lunatic, that this also would have been dealt with correctly, as Baha'u'llah himself went to Tehran to testify. If the Babis would have been behind as a group the attempt on the Shah, they would have just done away with Baha'u'llah completely. But they found out in their own court that he was innocent of it, which is why they banished him instead of executing him. So far be it from Allah what they attribute unto him. This community is innocent of all these things. So the Baha'i suggestion to elect the Supreme Tribunal will set up a government where different people will be protected by the government. That's the purpose of it. And this means protecting the future manifestations when they come, and protecting other rights and freedoms and privileges of other people to have academic, scientific, and artistic expression. And even if something we know is wrong between us and God, in our society, we still have the freedom to do these things. For instance, where I live, murder is illegal, and murder is forbidden in the 10 Commandments. And I would consider murdering somebody. Baha'u'llah says it's better to be killed than to kill. So I would consider this wrong, and it's illegal. But I'm not like monitored. Anybody in town could go out and murder somebody else after the fact, then they deal with it. See, that's called a free and open society. And this is the type of society we want to have for all the people of the world. For the spiritual person, that freedom is wonderful. For the immature person who's addicted to impulses, too much freedom, and you see the debacle here in the United States with the school shootings and the drugs and the illiteracy problems and the poverty and all of this. So if a nation actually has control amongst the population that is to manage the affairs of the people within certain borders, they need to do something to make the condition of their citizens better. The job of the government is to serve the people, and the people love the government. And they're not going to rebel against a government that's serving them. Who's going to bite the hand that feeds them if it's kind and open and just? And the hand that's feeding them is the agriculturalists in the country. Every nation should have a strong agriculture where these farms are self-sustaining and not dependent on fossil fuels and fossil fuel fertilizers and things like this. They have to have a way to grow their agriculture that's self-subsisting, and the farms shouldn't be taxed where they can be taken away from the people. And these are the ones feeding the rest of us. The people in the capital city are managing the affairs so the agricultural and spiritual and artistic and scientific and educational abilities of the spirit of man can be developed more. When we say convert to the spirit or attracted to the spirit, we mean, is this person attracted to learning an art or science in the practice of their spirituality? Are they attracted to education? Are they converted where they've dedicated their life as a lifelong learner to their art or science or healing or music or agriculture or whatever it is? Are they consecrated to their spirituality in their practice of agriculture or science or healing? This is what we're talking about. We don't mean attracted to the Baha'i faith, converted to the Baha'i faith, and consecrated to the Baha'i faith. That's going to cause problems. If that's what we were doing, then when the next manifestation showed up, we'd murder him, because he'd be anti-attracting to Baha'i. He'd be anti-converting to Baha'i, and he'd be anti-consecrated in Baha'i, because they'd be giving a new religion. This is what they accused all of them of. Jesus was anti-Moses, he was anti-Judaism, he was anti-attracting them to Judaism and the rabbis. He was certainly not converting people to accept the authority of the rabbis and the Sanhedrin and the Sadducees and Pharisees. He certainly wasn't consecrated himself to the rabbis or other people, so they killed him. This is the point. Every time the new manifestations have come, we have a spiritual and religious revolution. We can't have continual governmental and material revolution. This is stupid. It's destructive. Millions of people died in the so-called border dispute between Iraq and Iran. It was called a border dispute because war is illegal. And the people behind starting that to deplete these countries and topple the democracy that they had in Iraq and using rivalry and stuff is just insidious and horrific. And it's another one of the atrocities of the violation of the 1928 covenant that's taken place in the last 100 years.